And we are live. Hi, my name is John McMaster here in my Silicon Valley garage.
I'm Ryan Quarantano, and I'm here in my Los Angeles, I would say room, not garage.
Well, you still got a bit of a lab behind you, right?
I do have a little bit of a lab behind me. It's grown since when you first met me.
Yeah. Well, talking about that growth, I think you've been using that growth recently to do a little bit more advanced stuff. You want to talk about some of your recent projects?
Yeah, so some of the stuff I've been doing that I've been posting a lot about on the Twitter is delayering the WCH 340 series. So I've been doing ROM extraction projects based on pretty much every single chip that has to do with the 3.4 family to pretty much compare ROM because we don't know the architecture of the chip as of right now. So the only reason why we even knew that we extracted the ROM correctly is because we were lucky and happened to have hard-coded strings in the firmware once we used BitViewer. So that was really cool to see, and that was major progress. But we have a whole family of chips to look at and to really understand the architecture and how the circuits are working logic-wise to know how to disassemble this properly. We have like some half-assed Python script right now on GitHub that I think we have like 4 instructions that we've like confirmed, like a couple of jumps and USR TX and RX, some move instructions. I think we pretty much we nailed down, but
Sure. Can you also talk a little bit? I know there was a process there where you were able to use the delayered images to figure out some of the architecture of the chip by looking at the size of like buffers and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about how the delayering helps you to do that sort of reverse engineering?
yeah. Do you want me to actually show a picture of
Sure.
the?
Yeah, I think that would help a lot.
All right, let me get the picture up.
And if I have to enable sharing, maybe I should do that now. So there you go. You should be able to share.
And this was part of the Arduino CH340. There we go.
Hold on, please. Looks like we have a Garrick and a David in the chat. Hello there.
Actually, I'm wondering if I should open up a YouTube window so I can see these questions.
Yeah, I mean, I can also monitor it while you look that. Why don't you focus on just getting it up for now, and I'll keep an eye on that. So please stand by just a moment here.
All right, should I share a screen now or no?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, let's keep things moving.
System preferences. Okay. Apparently, my thing is not allowing me to share my screen.
I would do some hand puppets or something if I knew some magic tricks. Not sure what I can do here. Okay, random stuff. I got this ceramic thing recently for maybe try solder on. I heard these can be nice so you don't burn your table. Found it in the junk pile basically, so gonna try this out. What else I got here? All right, you got it up? Perfect.
All right. So yeah, this is the delayered CH340. This was a very, very simple delayering project. What we're about to get into for the ESP and Raspberry Pi is going to be a lot different method than what I used for the CH340.
Sure. But you also had some difficulties on this one, right? So it'd be good to start with this as a first starting point, and then we can talk about the more complex one, right?
Yeah. So this was actually one of my first delayering projects that actually I've ever done, and I actually happened to stumble upon treasure in our world, which is ROM, with one of my first delayer projects. I used a Wink, which is around 1.5. They say 1.5 to 3% at the highest concentration of hydrofluoric acid. Um, that's all I really needed at room temperature. I believe this sat in there for about 35 to 45 minutes, and that's why you're going to see kind of a little bit of mild corrosion oxidation even from the polysilicon. But yeah, once you zoom in from here, you can see as clear as day some beautiful ROM bits.
Sure. And if I may add a small clarification there, the major etching side effect you get there, at least in my experience, is the metal residue acts as an oxidizer. That oxidizes the silicon and then it gets eaten by the hydrofluoric acid. So a lot of those sort of darker etching artifacts tend to be caused by that.
And this happens because we leave it too long in the hydrofluoric acid.
there's multiple ways to deal with it. Changing the solution more often, less etching time. Yeah, those are all ways to kind of help compensate for that.
And I definitely was not doing that before. I was leaving tips in there for so long.
Sure, but you also had some before this that were more damage, right? This is one of the better ones, right?
No, I actually did this on first try.
Oh, this is the first try. Oh, nice.
Yeah, the ESP is the one that I like just failed miserably, and we'll get to that one.
Yeah,
that was like my most failed de-layering project there was.
Sure. And I'm thinking maybe we focus on that one even more because I think that one has the most interesting lessons. And we can show the progression on that just to kind of keep things moving.
Yeah. So I'm just going to describe like how we figure out the architecture real quick. So we see, was it 14 super columns? And for every super column, there's 16 bits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It goes all the way to 16. You could ignore this row as I think it's just a divider row.
Yeah.
And then over here, you can see there's a 16 to 1 bit mux multiplexer. So 16 byte goes into 1 bit. So 1 bit comes out. So it's 14-bit architecture since there's 14 super columns. And that's kind of where we went from there.
Sure. And I would say the most important takeaway that I wanted to give with this little short segment is this is why we are delayering, is to get to these ROMs. We need it to be clear. And then sometimes we also want to see small portions of the surrounding circuitry. Would you kind of agree with that statement? And that helps you further orient. Okay, so with that in mind, and this as an example, can we take a look at the ESP32 now?
Yes. So I will actually show you all my attempts with the ESP. I want to get that part ready because I even have like a folder called failed.
Sure, that's fine. I mean, this is the whole point is we want to kind of demonstrate, what some of these issues were and, how they were solved. So why don't you, show the really bad ones first, and let's talk about some of the issues.
Yeah, so I'll start from the top. So this is the ESP32 in its package. So I used concentrated sulfuric acid to get to the top metal layer. This was my first go around with the ESP. This image I took right here. I think I decapped like 3 of them until I got it right. But yeah, so this is what the top layer looks like. The only thing that you can see the polysilicon layers of is anything that has to do with radio frequency. And how we know this is radio frequency is because we can see the inductors and transformers, which I think at that point you can just assume that has to do with the RF and all the capabilities of the Wi-Fi that the ESP does. The rest of the ESP is hiding under what looks like to be very, very, very thick, either copper or aluminum layers. And we can assume that there's going to be memory blocks everywhere because prior to decapping this chip, I was reading with you actually, John, I think I remember this, that we saw there was a lot of memory on this chip. It was like 448,000 bytes, 448 kilobytes of SRAM, and there was 328 kilobytes of ROM. So we're going to assume with a chip of this size, I have not taken the measurements with my calipers of this chip, but I could now. But we assume that the ROM is going to be pretty dense, given the size of the chip.
Sure. And to clarify, one of the major objectives here was to learn a little bit more about the ROM on this chip, right? So figure out the technology behind the ROM and figure out how to even just get to it, because we can't see it right now with the way the chip is currently set up. Okay, so with that in mind, how did you go about trying to remove the layers from this chip?
So the first attempt I made to remove the layers actually turned out not horrible for the first, I would say, hour. So 1 hour into delayering, I got to this interesting, what looks like a diffusion. Like I would say, got to some diffusion here.
I would say most importantly, though, it looks like you very cleanly stripped out one metal layer, and you actually can see another metal layer there, which is quite nice since you just use acid to use that, which is a relatively irregular process. And that's a pretty clean layer image in general, I would say. So that's a pretty impressive image. I would be pretty happy with that I would be pretty happy if I got that myself.
I was very happy for the first 10 minutes.
Okay. So far so good though. Okay. So what happened next?
So this was in hydrofluoric acid, I would say, for about 30 minutes. It stripped off all that green copper layer of what it looks like. And it looks like we have some aluminum, maybe still some copper layers left, not entirely sure. So I put it back in hydrofluoric acid for around, I would say, 30 minutes. 30 minutes into it, I start to see some red markings on it. I didn't really think anything of it until another 30 minutes later inside the hydrofluoric acid, which caused it to look like this. The beauty is that we can now see memory blocks. And that was cool because even though I knew this was like heading towards ultimate failure from way too much exposure to hydrofluoric acid in one sitting without changing the solvent, I knew that, okay, the memory blocks are here. We can't see them and it's delayered, but whatever I delayer past this point is going to be completely ruined. I mean, we can attempt to go further and I'll show you what it looks like to try to attempt to go a little bit further.
Sure. Let's bring that
So
up.
this is what happens when you try to basically pick up something that's already broken.
Okay, yeah. And so my quick analysis from looking at this, the one on the left, can you bring those side by side? I think you've got a little bit of screen real estate there. Can you scooch that over a bit?
How's that?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I would say that the one on the left, I think we agree, is you're seeing a lot of etch defects to the left, that kind of splotchy areas. Those tend to be caused by oxidants, like the metal is the most common, kind of lands in places, and then that kind of deeper etches the silicon around it. The one on the right didn't immediately concern me. I do see some of those splotches already on the right, though. Yeah, that reddish color, though, I think I indicated, I thought that was most likely due to a thick oxide layer that you were still seeing across the chip. So,
which we found out later on that actually wasn't the biggest deal, actually. In fact, this stage could have been fixed.
Yes, I would agree with that. As long as you still have that oxide layer on top, and as long as you only care about the ROM below, the one on the right was still salvageable, I think. Assuming that was the original oxide and not something that you redeposited on the chip. Okay, so you got this first one on the left, and what was my advice to you once you got that one on the left? What did I say to you?
Once I got here, I was like, all right, John, this chip is done. Like, I mean, we can see, where the ROM might be, where the PROM might be, where the SRAM cells are. It's cool that we can navigate through it. It's data points, for us, but I want to get to the real thing eventually. I want to see what this chip looks like, clean. So after you had delayered the Raspberry Pi, and I noticed there were a lot of similarities in the thickness of the oxide layers, the polysilicon, the aluminum, even potential copper layers. And even the way the cells were arranged inside your design of the Raspberry Pi, I was like, that looks exactly like the ESP. So I was like, all right, he has to tell me his magic potion for how he did this.
Sure. And we'll go back to my process in a bit. Let's focus on yours for now, and then maybe we'll touch base on how I did mine. But they're very similar.
Do you want me to also talk about the other method I tried using with copper 2 chloride, or do you want to just skip that part?
Let's skip over that, I would say.
Okay. So what John told me to do is do everything in intervals. So what I would do, because we are dealing with both potential aluminum and copper layers, we can use hydrochloric acid with hydrogen peroxide, I would say at a 1-to-1 ratio. So basically what the formula would be is, since I was using 3% concentration hydrofluoric acid, I would dip in hydrofluoric acid for 15 minutes, take it out, wash it with water thoroughly to make sure there's no more hydrofluoric acid residue sitting on the chip, because we are then going to mix 50-50 of hydrochloric acid and hydrogen peroxide, which once you introduce copper into that mixture, creates something called copper 2 chloride. And that happens if you start to see a greenish color inside of your solution, which I did start to see. I started to see that greenish color start to come out, which means you've successfully made copper 2 chloride.
Sure. And to emphasize, the important thing here is now the difference is we are both changing the acid solution more regularly. We're washing the chip. So as any metal is getting exposed, we're trying to relatively aggressively remove it from the chip as fast as possible. That way it doesn't sit on there and start causing side reactions as we're trying to etch with the hydrofluoric acid.
So yeah, you'll see my lab notes here. You'll see exactly how I did it. So S1 is for my first round. So it's pretty much a rinse and repeat. So I'll do hydrofluoric acid, 15 minutes, done, wash in water. And then the copper 2 chloride with the hydrochloric acid, hydrogen peroxide mixture only for 2 minutes. And then I would repeat this in 3 cycles and then start to look at it. Because in the beginning, you're probably not going to see much. So after the 3rd round, it got to about here, I would say, which was a very, very interesting layer because I actually skipped right over this one. So this one happened from my previous delayering. So I didn't even get to this phase between round 1 and round 3. I got straight to the titanium nitride.
It looks like this layer is plausibly the layer just below the other one, though. So
yes, and it would make sense.
Yeah, so it looks like you plausibly have both layers, though, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, and I actually didn't even realize what we were looking at, that we were looking at titanium nitride layers or barriers, as these little yellow dots are.
Well, yeah, I'd have to be, I'd be a little bit cautious, but let's talk about why I think that's the case. So you see the little bit that's floating there in the middle? Stop moving. Go to the left. Okay, zoom in. Yeah, where that is. So one of the reasons why I suggested this was possibly barrier is because you're using a very aggressive etching solution. I don't know exactly at your concentrations. I'd have to double check. I think even still that should have etched, if that was, say aluminum, for example, or even copper, that would have etched that very quickly. It's very thin, and so it should have etched metal like that. But the fact that it was still there and it's a little bit of a yellowish tinge-ish, I was thinking that instead that's one of these so-called barriers that are used in certain metal layers on chips that would have been relatively inert to these acid etching solutions. So ideally, what you would have also done is employed a so-called barrier etch, which, for example, may be a mixture of ammonia and hydrogen peroxide, which is what I use. And those would allow you to remove those and actually delayer the chip a little bit cleaner. But in your case, I think it was fine, just to kind of etch around them until they eventually fell off the chip.
Yeah, they did eventually fall off. And I was a little bit worried about that because I didn't have barrier etch on me at the time of doing this. So pretty much I knew after this point, I should probably start imaging a lot more because it seemed like the more rounds would start to sit in, the more the chip was going to start to change. And it did. Sure. So after round 3, we go to round 5, and that's the next time I took a picture. And this is where it starts to look like I failed a little bit again. I was like, oh crap. I probably, was over etching again and let it sit in the solution for way too long. There's a lot of research I was doing with atmospheric oxygen also causing corrosion with hydrofluoric acid. I didn't know if that was the cause of it, because I wasn't putting a proper glass lid on top of my beaker. There could have been so many things, but this didn't end up being a failure, as we'll see in the later lessons. But yeah, I got this really, really crazy tie section.
Sure. And just to clarify, those colors are caused due to thin film interference with the different thicknesses of oxides you're seeing on the chip. So let's keep that in mind then, and let's go to your next chip there.
Yeah, so this part we already saw. So let's go down to round 9. Okay. So round 9 is where things really start to change. It looked like anything that might have been copper had already been gone. And at this point, I could already use hydrofluoric acid from this point on, just in intervals. But I start to shorten the intervals. I know it says 15 minutes here, but I actually start to shorten it to 10. Because we were getting to a little more sensitive of an area. I didn't want to take any chance that we were about to get like metal stuck on the chip and oxidize the chip again.
Sure, but already I would say this looks a lot smoother than your previous one. Even though it's not done yet.
When you go from here to here, yeah.
Okay, so let's see. I think you're the finished one next, or pretty close to it.
Close to the finished one. So 2 more rounds one more round caused most of the red to go away. As you can see, we got a little bit of a blotch there, but we can start to see very clearly now in a very nice way the memory cells. And then the last one was this one where you can
Sure.
actually see different actual colors for the cells.
And very importantly, most of the splotching is gone. You know, it's not quite perfect. It looks like you possibly still have some more poly or something
Yeah,
on
it's not
there,
done yet.
but the quality of this etch is considerably better versus the other one that we had. I don't know if you have that to put that up side by side. That'd be nice if you're able to do that.
Yeah, I'm gonna get a better image of it because I have a 20x version of this. I'm gonna get that popping up.
Yeah, if you can get them side by side. But anyways, yeah, not
So, which one do
that.
you want me?
Oh, your original etch. You know, the one that was really splotchy.
Oh, this one?
That wasn't the final one. Was it the one below it too, maybe?
Oh, you're talking about this one or this one?
The one above it?
Or this is the total fail one, this
Yeah,
one?
yeah, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So that was
Oh,
that
that one.
was your original try, right? So let's put those
Yeah.
side by side. So just to show this is the difference. So the one on the right was the first attempt, and then the one on the left is now one that had different etch parameters, and you can see that it got a drastically different result between these two. And minding you, it's kind of that lower left area that you were looking for.
Yeah, because I mean, I made some assumptions because of how the memory layout seemed to be in the data sheet that they did include the fact that there is PROM on the chip. So for now, I'm under your assumption that this is the PROM area and this is the mask ROM that we'd be interested in. So you can see as of right now, there's still a little more to get to before we can see individual transistors like we were able to do with the CH340. Um, but we may run into problems with that because of how dense these end up might being. The fact that there's 300,000 plus.
Could we actually take a step back? Why do you think that that is the ROM versus the other areas on the chip? Because we have other, like, how do you know what the memory is? Let's start there.
So I guess for me, it's just from delayering other chips like the Atmega and the CH340. I've come to see what SRAM cells look like, and these look like they would be SRAM cells. Generally, with ROM, the way I approach it and the way I think that it's going to be, it looks like columns. Like you can see columns inside of, I would say, like the top layer of the ROM. Where with SRAM, you don't really see it in a column-like fashion in the ways that I've seen it in chips.
Gotcha. Now, the other thing that I will also point out is that there's relatively few ROMs on the chip. Maybe back it up real quick and just leave it zoomed out for a second. There's relatively few ROMs on the chip. You know, we expect maybe one, boot ROM, maybe security ROM, and maybe some special purpose. So we don't expect too much types of ROMs, just a handful of them. On the other hand, RAM, SRAM is a lot more common on the chip. Different buffers will use it, caches, that sort of stuff. So we also expect that type of memory to appear in more variety. And that's the other thing too here from kind of an entropy analysis standpoint. We have a lot of the darker type of memory block, and it's a lot less regular. We have a lot of different sizes there. And that to me suggests that it's a more common type of memory that's appearing a lot more on the chip. And so that, at least that's kind of how I tend to look at it to also identify it if I'm not familiar with this type of chip.
Another way I also like to look at it as well is that, generally with SRAM, it's 6 transistors per cell, rather than with ROM, it's 1 transistor per bit.
Sure. If we had a microscope that was powerful enough to actually look at the individual things,
like
and
some scanning electron microscope.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I'm not sure. This chip, though, I think the process technology was relatively large. I wouldn't be surprised if I could either see it either with my oil objective, but certainly my SEM can probably see the transistors on this. So, feel free to send it my way if you want to try to get that snag there.
Yeah, for sure.
I think we're almost out of time for this video. I'd like to end by 4. Maybe I could briefly talk about my process for the Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, do you want to share?
Roughly. Yeah, let me just go to video, I think, or I can share my screen actually. Let me start with that. And share screen. But in any case, yeah, so the other big difference, part of the reason why I can get away with this, maybe also just to emphasize, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second here. And let me just go to video. I gave this talk at Hardware I/O about this kind of automated chip etching machine. I'm kind of in the process right now of cleaning this up, but part of the reason why I can get away with this also is mine is a very automated process. I don't know how many hours of work you kind of put into getting your result, but because I happen to have this etching machine, I just kind of threw it in there and came back in like an hour or something.
Was it an hour for you for the whole thing?
It was probably less than that because mine etches a lot quicker.
Mine was four. Mine was 4.5 hours.
But yeah, for the most part though, it also was automated. So I wasn't actually sitting there, turning knobs or anything like that.
Yeah, see, yours wasn't labor intensive, which is the other big part. See,
Yeah,
it wasn't like 4 hours of me going to watch cartoons while this thing was layering. It's like, no, like I'm like in a full suit with my respirator, like mixing hydrochloric acid and hydrogen peroxide, getting the next solution ready. And because hydrochloric acid is so volatile, fumes like crazy. It was such a mess, and it's just so much to deal with. And
sure. It's also worth mentioning that for certain steps, I was also doing a barrier etch. I don't know if that significantly changed the outcome, but certainly a number of process differences there. I think that if you were to change your solution even more aggressively, you probably could get a similar equivalent result, but it tends to be a lot of work just to the huge stack up. Another common question I get too that I should add is why is this not an issue for older chips? And let me bring up one of those chips maybe as a last thing. I just did that chip for Ken. So let me share my screen here again. And I think we can maybe end there. So I'm going to share screen. Now here is this Motorola chip. And this is what I would call an older chip. You can see there is some metal here, just one metal layer, very old process technology. And here on the right is it delayered. And I really didn't do a lot for this. I think I just threw it in hydrofluoric acid. I don't know if I even used any metal etch. I just said go, very basic. And the reason why I can get away with that on this is, the damage from these sort of splotches is at such a large scale that, it's almost helpful for reverse engineering purposes. So let's take a look at this section. I think you can see my mouse pointer, right?
Yep.
Notice how this area is darker than this one, right? So that's that same etching defect that you were getting on your chip, except in this case, it almost helped because we actually can see a bit of the layers above it. And I believe you're seeing some of the doping differences here. Similarly, there was, I don't know, some sort of layer here, I guess metal or something, maybe. And you can also see that there was a lot of etch defects here. But because the scale is so large, this really doesn't hurt us that much. Finally, if you look in, you even can see some shadowing effects from some of the layers above here. But once again, the scale is so large on this. We have so much contrast. Those really don't hurt the final results of this. And because these tolerances are so much larger, we can get away with just not having the same precision, changing out the solutions and whatnot.
And we also can say that the fact that maybe the metal layers also in older chips are a lot thinner too, right? Like they're not as thick as they would be in modern chips, or just not have as much layers in general.
It definitely doesn't have as many layers in general. I can't speak to the thickness themselves so much. I'm not sure about that. Well, I think this is probably a good place to start, unless you have any quick last minute closing thoughts on this. Maybe we should check. Oops, I'm trying to zoom out here. I can check questions one last time. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. Let me check questions. Ryan, any closing thoughts?
Oh no, I'm good on my end.
Let's see, there's maybe a question. Go on. Would you use a 609? I guess this is probably the 3M filter model. Let me look this up. So this is a question from Garrick, and he's asking about the respirators that we're using. So this is the 60928 3M organic vapor acid gas cartridge. I think that's very close to the one that I use. I think that mine are called multi-gas or something like that, but it's the same sort of pink thing. So it's either very close to what I use or not too far off.
Yeah, I can show you the exact one. I think I know which one he's talking about. It's this one right here with the P100 filters for organic vapors.
Yeah.
This one.
Yeah. Yeah, something like that is pretty good. If I vaguely recall correctly, I think it attenuates hydrofluoric acid fumes by a scale of a factor of 50 or something like that. So like don't douse your head in the fumes, but it'll definitely improve your exposure if there's an issue there.
It will help you become less sick, is what he's trying to say.
Yeah, I would also add that the 3% solution that you're using, Ryan, at least at room temperature, is relatively safe. So it shouldn't be putting off too much fumes. If you get to say 48%, you're going to get a lot more fumes coming off of it. And even mine at 20%, I think I do see some fumes.
Oh, does it fume at room temperature for 20%?
I think I've seen some fumes coming off of it. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's kind of scary. Not gonna lie.
Yeah. So you do need. Yeah, you need to exercise a little bit of healthy caution there.
Yeah, for wink, it's nothing. I mean, at room temperature, there's no fumes coming out. I mean, I still wear just in good faith.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no fumes. For 37% hydrochloric acid, which is considered concentrated, it'll fume at room temperature. So that's something you definitely want to have a respirator for. The moment the hydrochloric acid is open from the bottle and poured in with the hydrogen peroxide, you'll start to see some.
Yeah, and I should also add you should be doing this in a fume cabinet as well.
Yeah, so something cute like this.
But this channel's focus is not safety, so don't ask us for safety advice for sure. In any case, with that, I think this is probably a good point to break. Thank you all that tuned in, and talk to you next time. Take care, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.